Hello and welcome. My name is Kyle, and I'm an animator on the Overwatch team. With the release of our latest support hero, Juno, I wanted to take some time today to give you a behind-the-scenes look at her animations. I'll be going over her movements and abilities, and provide some insights on how we iterated and ultimately landed on all of her motions. So with that, let's get into the animation of Juno. First up, let's talk about her in-game idle. We spent a lot of time early on testing out versions of her both on the ground and hovering slightly above it. When testing out idle poses, we're looking for something that fits the hero's personality and is easily identifiable among the cast of characters. With Juno being from Mars and comfortable moving around in space, we could not pass up the opportunity to give her a core sense of zero-G movement with the hovering style. Another part of the idle animation is what we call the fidget. This is a break in the animation where we can see a bit more of the character as they're idling and waiting for the match to start. The one that stuck out to us the most, even at an early state, was her stretch. It felt like something Juno would naturally do, as she's in a spacesuit all the time. She'd want to take some time to stretch out those limbs. Once we landed on her hovering for her idle, we were able to start on her locomotion. Having her hover allowed us to try some more unique movement styles. Initially, we were leaning towards having her fully glide around. However, we had a hard time visually differentiating her glide boost ability state from her standard locomotion. This encouraged us to try something different for her base loco. We did retain that initial glide style of movement for her glide boost abilities. This way, the two different states read much more clearly. After finding the movement styles we liked, we were able to replicate that in the first person perspective to try and mimic the same motions. For Juno's jumps, we actually have three different types for her: her base jump, her double jump, and her glide boost jump. A lot of animations were put into this to make sure that no matter what direction she's jumping in, the jump always looks good. One of her more unique but less frequently seen animations is actually her get up animation from a knockdown state. We leaned into her faster, zippy movement style to get her off the ground quickly. Juno's weapon is called the Meta Blaster. It's a fairly standard burst SMG on the surface, but we tried to inject a bit more character and unique elements into her reload animation. An early iteration on this had a straightforward mag eject and replacement. It worked, but we wanted to try and find something that felt more Juno. We spent some time thinking about how she would use this in practice, and using it in space is really common for her. As such, we thought she might want some sort of magnetic attachment to the magazine. So if she was doing this in a zero-G environment, the magazines wouldn't float away from her if she let them slip by accident. This line of thinking got us to where we are today, and we're pretty happy with how this one turned out. For her quick melee, early on at the concept stage when we saw her awesome boots, we knew we wanted to do something like a kick. We tried a few different styles, and some of the early iterations, while cool, felt a bit too well practiced for something Juno would do. We ended up with something more straightforward, but we took steps to make sure it still felt like its own unique space. For her third person quick melee, we did have a roundhouse animation for her, which again, felt really cool. However, in third person specifically, this presented a bit of an issue in gameplay. She could instantly spin her body around and have her head hitbox shift around very quickly. Juno already moves really fast along the battlefield, and we didn't want players to quick melee as they're trying to avoid certain shots. Also, for her crouch melee in third person, having her leg come up while she's lower to the ground was really difficult, so we ended up going for a more traditional punch here. For her speed ring ability, we were really inspired by one of the early concepts from our concept artist Daryl Tan. Juno was in a really awesome dynamic pose that we wanted to mimic as much as we could in gameplay. Traditionally, we keep the lower body in place, and we couldn't hit something like this for the animation playing at idle, but since Juno hovers, she could reach a pose close to this and have it work pretty seamlessly. This way, at idle, we get the nice dynamic pose, and the upper body still works well for when it happens during locomotion. The Pulsar Torpedo's ability looks a bit different from when Juno was first shown at BlizzCon. The shoulder mounts are gone in favor of having the pods float autonomously. This allowed us to add a lot more interesting motions to them, one of my favorites being her third person outro. They twirl and dive back into her backpack. And finally, we have Juno's ultimate. We tried early on to have an actual screen in Juno's gauntlet that she would interact with. There were some issues we ran into with trying to get all of the motion reading in a short time frame. Through a lot of iteration, we ended up having her screen be more of a hollow projection that she can bring up and interact with. It also lets us have a more forward-facing direction for her swiping in the first-person perspective, which gives us more directionality for firing the ultimate. Facial animation is very important on our characters to really get their personalities to shine through. For Juno, we started by looking at some concept expressions. This gives us a starting place for her overall tone. From here, we start breaking down her different facial features and how they relate to each other to make sure our facial animations stay on model. For her eyes and brows, we keep an eye out for things like changes in direction, shape length, and overall size. Once we have all this info, we can start by building out a library of poses for her. These function as a starting point for our animators so they can quickly get a pose down that feels right for the animation, and then fine-tune from there. Working on facial animation really requires honing in on the fine details of a character. It's an essential piece of bringing our characters to life. While I've focused on animation in this video, it's important to note just how many people are involved in creating our heroes. Design, concept, modeling, rigging, animation, visual effects, sound, lighting, QA testing, and more. Without all these talented people, creating these heroes just would not be possible, so a big thank you to the Juno team and all of Team 4. And that wraps up this video on Juno's animation. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this brought you some interesting insight into animating heroes on Overwatch. Now, go out there and play some Juno.